A while ago, I produced a video talking about why I thought the Extinction Rebellion climate change campaign was hurting, not helping. Since then, we've had the main event, the big promised rebellion. So let's evaluate what we've learned and if my original comments were spot on, utterly misguided, or a combination of the two. My name is Mallen Baker. This is the Mallen Baker Show for Changemakers. Alright, let's start with a couple of the comments on the things that we've seen. First, my immense respect to those who, because of their genuine concern about climate change, were prepared to be arrested, potentially go to jail, in the peaceful spirit in which they've conducted themselves. It is, or it should be, an action of last resort. I don't personally think it's the right fit for what we need in this case, but I have nothing but respect for the people who put themselves in that position over a cause that is about societal benefit. Second, in the early bit of Extinction Rebellion that was well planned, it was also impressively well executed. During the first 3 days or so, the assumption that this approach would completely wrong-foot the establishment and hijack the attention of the news media was spectacularly successful. After that first couple of days, the problem with leaderless movements that I referred to in the first video started to kick in. Namely, the consequences of lack of discipline began to show themselves. First, you had a splinter group go and glue themselves to opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn's home, hoping this would endear them to him. His response was much the same as anyone else's would be when some nutters come and camp outside your house. Not best pleased. By all accounts, they went off rather tearful. Then they decided to disrupt the London Underground. It became obvious very quickly that would get a huge negative kickback. Overnight, the group decided to rein it back in and just do a token protest. The next day, they said they'd listen to their supporters and they were going to shut down Heathrow, because there's nothing that hardcore environmentalists hate more than people flying. But then that got huge kickback, with many thousands going for Easter holidays the next day, so once again, when the day came, they settled for a token gesture. Then the message went out the group was offering to pause operations to negotiate with the Mayor of London. That was immediately followed by a message from someone else involved that there would certainly not be a pause, thank you very much. Then it was stated there'd be a big meeting to discuss what to do next, and a certain amount of disarray in the ranks became evident. But the remarkable question was, how come it started so strong? And it turns out because it was less leaderless at that stage than I thought, and the tactics were devised for a very specific purpose. One of the founders, Roger Hallam, has spoken at length. 4 hours of lectures on YouTube, plus an extensive interview on RT, which is the current name for Russia Today, where he explains the true objectives. And in so doing, he also described the tactics that would achieve those objectives. And those are exactly the tactics the group used in those first few days. So that tells you that this goes to the heart of how it all started. Now, here are some clips with Roger Hallam talking about his plans. In so doing, he played straight into the role of the villain in the superhero movies, who can't help but talk all about how ingenious his plans are when he's got the hero trapped and theoretically about to face a certain death. In the modern world, it seems that happens on YouTube.
The fundamental thing we need is mass participation, civil disobedience. What that means is tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people going to the street. If you want tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people to go to the street, it has to be non-violent. And the reason for that is you need to encourage many different groups to go to the street. And that includes old people, young people, women, vulnerable groups. Now, if you're going to engage in violence, as the literature shows, the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to lose those people, partially because they don't want to get hurt, and partially because they're scared. You know, they don't want to be part of something that's violent. And the people that are going to come to the fore are mainly young men. And if you want lots of young men involved, that's fine, but they're not going to bring about a revolution. Or if they are, they're going to start shooting each other afterwards, again, as the literature shows. So it's a no-brainer that you have to bring lots of people into the street, and so it's a no-brainer that you have to stay non-violent. As Gene Sharp and other theorists have shown over the last 20, 30 years, this is the most effective way to bring down governments and change regimes. So it's a matter of getting with the program. You know, like lots of people on the left say that, You know, climate change is obviously there, and they accuse right-wing people of being in denial. Well, there's lots of people on the left that are in denial about the most effective way to bring about political change.
And when we talk about effective change, we're talking about revolution.
I think we're inevitably talking about revolution in the present context, yes.
And of course, all of the theorists of revolution, Crane Brinton and others, have pointed out that revolutions do not succeed until a significant, or at least a segment of the ruling apparatus, in particular the foot soldiers of the apparatus, the police and the security forces, defect. And the most effective mechanism by which you get people to defect from a corrupt and even criminal system is nonviolence.
That's right, and it's important to understand how that works. So, you know, people have been doing nonviolence now for over 100 years, back to Gandhi in the last century. It involves two main mechanisms: disruption and sacrifice. Disruption basically is a materialistic mechanism whereby you increase the costs to the opposition. Sacrifice is equally important, and that's a mechanism through which you lose your liberty, you show yourself to be vulnerable, you ultimately die for the cause, and that brings more people out onto the street. It gets more people to support your cause. Is the more that the elites repress you, then the more likely they're going to risk more people joining you. So they're in a bit of a checkmate. And the main thing that needs to happen is there needs to be a critical mass of people that trigger that backfiring effect. So one of the confusions a lot of people say is, you know, okay, so we need to bring down the government, we need the people to rise up. Well, first of all, the people never rise up. Most people are involved in other activities. You're usually looking at 1 to 3% of the population that rise up in order to have like structural change or rebellion or revolution or what have you.
It's highly delusional on so many levels, but it does at least explain the choices that they've been making to date. First, the tell the truth trope. They've been very big on the it's us versus them theme. They have failed you. They have done nothing. They have been lying to you. They have betrayed you. If you want to motivate people into joining you in overthrowing a regime, you should ideally feed off an existing sense of grievance. If you can't do that, then you need to create a sense of grievance. That's why they show no interest in explaining what truth they think the government isn't telling. They show no interest into entering into nuanced discussion about what the government would have to say that it isn't currently saying, because they didn't want to come to an agreement. They want to create a sense of alienation to mobilise the masses. It also explains why the simplistic messages around "your children will die," because they're relying on the emotional appeal of that message to motivate supporters to put themselves in harm's way for the cause. Second, unrealistic demands. Guarantees that however successful their short-term tactics are, the government isn't likely to meet their demands. So no chance of being stymied by apparently being successful. Third, sortition, because, come on, why does a campaign on climate change go on about a decision-making process if it's just about getting people to take action on climate change? Would that really be the highest priority rather than getting the investment in renewable energy ramping up? However, it is an obvious component if your intention is actually overthrowing the regime. There were a few other signs. Before the main event kicked off, another of the founders published this article talking about how Extinction Rebellion is not about climate change, it is about anti-Western ideals and anti-capitalism. In a couple of ill-disciplined moments, the group's main Twitter account pushed out messages in the same vein, such as this one, which was quickly removed after I commented on it. Now bear in mind this is a modern, leaderless movement. Arguably, the initial creation of this strategy and its disciplined execution in the first 3 days showed how powerful leadership still remains when it happens. But now it's in full swing. And whatever Roger Hallam thinks should happen, which clearly shaped the first few days, doesn't necessarily win approval of the larger group they now have successfully attracted. Not least because, as you've probably spotted already, this scheme, although it makes the choices the group has been making appear rational within its own logic, is nevertheless completely bonkers. And here's why. 1. The premise for the whole scheme is wrong. The sort of action they propose would not carry the population and would never win the consent you would need to undertake radical action. 2, the reasoning that the state would collapse before the onslaught of Extinction Rebellion was based on a massive misreading of the dynamics by political ideologues. This is not Gandhi, who was leading a people to freedom from colonial rule, and whose strategy was perfectly suited to that aim, as I describe in another video. This is a mature democracy with well-established institutions of governance. The police were not going to change sides, even if a couple of them were seduced into dancing or skateboarding on camera. And our very professional police were not going to treat protesters badly, leading to large numbers of ordinary people to leap to their defence. 3. Revolutions do not have a good track record of making things better or delivering on whatever it was that motivated the masses to join in, and there are lots of reasons for that. 4. Tiny minorities of people should not be allowed to seize control, should they? Even if it's your people. In any case, the plan, which depended on irresistible momentum to the point of revolution, failed to achieve that, even if it provided all sorts of logistical problems for police. Ultimately, no police cracked the heads of grannies. Therefore, thousands more didn't swarm onto the streets in popular revolt. Therefore, as we looked ahead to the 2-week mark, everyone knew that the majority of people would have to go back to their day jobs, and so the numbers would fizzle. Really, the whole thing was saved at the end by the presence of Greta Thunberg, who was the one movement spokesperson who would be guaranteed a respectful and even admiring reception in the House of Commons to deliver a message to MPs informing them that they're on notice. What I did say in the previous video was that the tactics would polarise opinion, which is the opposite of what we need. In general, that seems to have been the case. A YouGov poll early on showed that 52% of people disapproved of the Extinction Rebellion, with 36% approving. Then just today, Sky released a poll taken a few days later into the events, showing that 53% opposed the group's tactics, with 29% approving. 31% they've been inspired to do more, 26% said they've been put off. And that's the definition of polarising. But a lot of credit goes to Environment Secretary Michael Gove, who showed up for Greta Thunberg and repeated his respectful message about the truth of the message that more needs to be done, and said, "Greta, you have been heard." Now, the campaigners won't give him credit, of course, because for them it's all about us versus them, but the definition of leadership in this situation is taking your followers where they need to go and not where they thought they wanted to go. Gove has been doing that on the environment for the last year. He is seeking to bridge the gap, even as others on his side and on the other side are trying to widen it. I believe in giving credit where it's due. And that's not to say that there's no scope for demonstrations and protest, but they should be focused on building and widening support, not making the issue seem to be a concern of radical leftists with a saviour delusion. Here's a basic principle for you. The ends do not justify the means, because once you justify the means, others will take it as permission to use the same means for ends of which you don't approve. That is a very basic lesson we've learned through history, which is not rendered irrelevant by what you perceive to be the urgency of the crisis. So, what happens next? My prediction is that as a result of its slightly unexpected early success, the group will struggle with indecision and internal conflict about the next steps, as it matches the current feeling that we have this big momentum and have to take advantage while we can, with the greater propensity of a crowd that was never brought into the revolutionary aims to seek less divisive actions than so far. There will be splinter actions. There was a letter in the Times from a few business leaders, although no mainstream current corporate leaders, welcoming the news of a new XR business platform that they wanted to encourage. And I saw a few immediate, furious tweets from activists who were closer to the original objectives, who saw this as a sign of betrayal. And that's an indicator of things to come, I suspect. As some want to embrace what looks like the opening of a door to influence, because to be honest, that door has been open all along, if you don't disbar yourself by adopting extreme tactics. But those in the original revolutionary spirit of the movement will correctly identify that walking through that door undermines their narrative. Do I still think Extinction Rebellion is hurting, not working? Ultimately, yes, because the nature of the action is polarising, not just because of disruption, but by choice, with the deliberate use of the us versus them campaign language and apocalyptic emotional messaging. It is a powerful approach for political conflict. It's a rubbish approach for solving a complex mutual problem.